Alrighty folks, we're getting really close to the home stretch here. One of the last things we have to do before buttoning this back up and giving it a test is swapping out the capacitors. I tend to use capacitors from Console 5. They're not a sponsor in this video, I'm just giving them a shout out because I really like that for a lot of systems, including this really old one like the Intellivision 2. They have capacitor kits for where you go on, you order capacitor kits, they're all picked for you. You don't have to do anything special, go out and order parts lists or anything. They're all here. Not only that, but their website has instructions for where everything goes. It's just awesome. It's less work I have to do and it just makes it easier. So to make this a bit easier on myself, I'm gonna pull out my helping hands. I'm gonna actually disconnect the small power board for right now because most of the capacitors that need to be swapped are actually on this board, and trying to do everything like that vertical, it's just a pain. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on that. Alright, I use soldering braid to desolder. A lot of people don't have to use a solder sucker. I am just terrible with using those and prefer the soldering braid. In fact, when you spread it out like this, it works really well. When I use flux, I like to use a flux pen rather than liquid flux when I can because it just goes on easily exactly where I need it to. I'm not having it just run everywhere. It just makes things a whole lot easier. Alrighty, let's pull out the soldering iron and get this old solder off of here, and we can pull this board off. The other keys for soldering correctly, lots of ventilation. I have this awesome little fan, so you might hear that in the background. As you can see, this 4-year-old solder just is not really wanting to come off of here. But that's okay. Take our time, keep working at it, and we'll eventually get it off. You see part of the issue here. I'm not sure if it's showing up on camera, but all these little connector traces down here, they look a lot like traces from a video game cartridge. They're covered in solder, so that is where my solder braid is sticking to. So right now I'm gonna clean that up with some rubbing alcohol real fast, and then what we're gonna do after that is take that off first before trying to go to the pins, because otherwise I'm just never gonna get the pins off, and my solder braid is just gonna want to stay connected right to the circuit board. Actually, one thing you do sometimes a little bit too to make things a little bit easier is put on some new solder, let it merge with the old solder. And I'm actually not sure what the reasoning is behind that, but sometimes it just makes it come right off way, way easier. Alright, so some new solder on there. Again, not sure how well it's showing up on camera, but some of my new solder here, it's coming on pretty shiny. Over time, a lot of times soldering does oxidize a little bit and will get a little bit dull. And so we're just going to reflow these a little bit, get some of that new solder in there, and hopefully make it easier to actually desolder these. I know, sounds a bit counterintuitive to put more solder on to take solder off, but hey, if it does the trick, I'm not going to complain. On the plus side, I haven't had a chance to entertain you all by burning myself with soldering iron, so that's something to look forward to, because every time I use it, I manage to do that. There we go. So now you can see there's a huge difference before when I was trying to take it off and I was barely getting anything up. Put all the new solder on there, and it's just wicking right into the solder braid. You gotta let it heat up a little bit. Whoop. And just sucking right into it. Pulling off from around the pins. Whoop. There we go, coming right up. One thing to definitely be careful of when I was first starting to learn how to solder, I did a lot, was you can actually burn the traces off of a circuit board. It's not great when you do that for obvious reasons. Sometimes it can be repaired if you're able to get it back on there, but it just creates more work for yourself if you do that, if you're not careful, and you accidentally burn the trace off of the circuit board. Also, typically, solder braid doesn't stick to this. There's just so much solder on here that it is just going to town, sticking on there like crazy. See, told you it was bound to happen. So that was the first pass through. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean this up, put a bit more flux on, give it one more pass, because a lot of these pins still have a bunch of solder around the pin, and we need to make sure we get all that off, or else this board's just not coming loose. Alright, so I may have mentioned this earlier. If you're doing any soldering and you want to clean up, definitely use as high a percentage isopropyl alcohol as you can. This isopropyl alcohol is 91%. 99% would be great. Unfortunately, that is incredibly hard to get. I think I've found it once in the few years since I've been doing this, and obviously you use it all up, don't have it anymore, so it'll work with what I have. I have seen people use denatured alcohol. Don't use denatured alcohol on a circuit board. At least not if you want that circuit board to continue to work. It's a different type of alcohol. It's not really electronic safe. I am not sure why. I'm assuming it's something with the chemical composition. I'm not really sure. As for why the high alcohol percentage in this, the higher the alcohol percentage, the faster it evaporates and less water is actually mixed in with it. So 91% isopropyl alcohol, 91% of it is alcohol, and only 9% water, which means it evaporates super, super quickly. Alright, got this all cleaned off, and yet putting even more flux on, because we got to get the rest of this all cleaned up. And flux just helps us transfer the heat smoothly and make sure that we're not going to destroy any of the solder mask, the green stuff on this board. Typically solder mask in older electronics was usually green that you saw, but these days you can have your custom PCBs printed with all kinds of different soldering masks, and it's actually really cool. Alright, so with these pins all loosened, they should begin to pop out. Yeah, just a couple that are in here a little bit tight, so just gonna take the soldering iron and touch them to loosen up the solder here. And this one pin just does not want to be my friend today. You get a thing, always happy to lend a hand. Adam's Family reference if you get it. And success. Alrighty. Okay, we're gonna set this main board off to the side for a couple minutes, and then we're gonna get started on a smaller board. So one of the next things to do is we'll take a look at our capacitor map here, take off all the old capacitors, and then we'll be ready to put on the new ones. Alright, so let's get those old capacitors off. By movie magic, they're all out. So what we're gonna do is take this board and flip it over. We can see here that there's a lot of empty spaces. So what's kind of cool is on pretty much every circuit board I've worked on, there's always a little circle here for at least these this type of capacitor that stands up, that has the either the positive part marked with a plus And with capacitors like this, it's always a longer leg that's positive, or some of them instead have part of one side of the circle filled in, and it matches the negative side. Maybe a bit hard to see on camera, but you can see that the shorter leg is always painted a different color. In most cases that I've seen, it's white. It's also a little minus sign on there. I know you're not going to be able to see that on camera. But let's follow our capacitor map, and we will stick these back on. So we're going to start off here with the this big guy, and we're going to stick it back through the old through holes. Now, this one's a little bit wider than the older capacitor, so just to make sure we get it down in there securely. And then we'll flip it over. And one thing I like to do is, if I can, I like to put the capacitors all in and then come back and solder them in. So in order to hold them in, I might just bend the legs a little bit. Then I can let this go, and I can even shake it around a little bit. Not great, but it's still held in there, even upside down. So it's one thing you'll run into. Sometimes the capacitors marked might be a little bit different than what you get in these kits. Kits are all tested. They should all be good to be okay for the power that goes through them, and tested by, in this case, Console 5 is the supplier that I used. One thing that's good to do is hold the board and check that the longer legs are what you expect to be in the positive arrangement. And a lot of times these different capacitor maps will show you which side the negative and the positive side is on, with a little dash for the negative. So that's also super helpful. All right, last one, and it matches what should be on here. All right, actually, I'm gonna pop this one off real fast just to make sure. Nope, I had that one backwards. So this one has a little plus signs on it. I actually like the ones that have the shading on part of it, because then you know exactly where that little plus sign is. So I can tell I had it backwards because on the map here, there's a little plus or minus sign on the C15 and C12 facing each other, which means that's how these capacitors need to be oriented. All right, so we have it back in the helping hands, and it's also been pre-fluxed before I put it back in. So now comes the fun part, to get to solder all these capacitors back into place. So as you're going, you can go through and cut off these extra lengths of legs from the capacitors. Just be sure that you don't cut them too short, or else the capacitor might fall through if you have to reflow any of these joints. If you try your hand at soldering and you're not that great as you're going, just keep practicing. It's one of those things that I can't tell you how many times as I was going through learning this, I'd solder a joint, bridge about 6 of them together, and then I had to come back through, take it all off, and try again. Just take some practice. All right, let's cut off these extra leg lengths. And it's always good to have a good grip on these as you're cutting them, because otherwise they will fly straight through to your neighbor's house, because these suckers enjoy flying through the air. So now on for the main board. The only thing we actually have to replace here is this little toggle button is what's used for the power button. It's a dome switch that a lot of times are used in joysticks. Over time, especially in the Intellivision 2s, they tend to get really worn out. So we're gonna pull this one off and replace it. All right, these, in addition to being taped down, also clip down onto the board. So let's pop that up. let's pull the old tape off as well. So you can see it has a little bit of film around it. So we're going to take our scissors and trim this down a little bit. I'm going to go on the diagonals here because of how the little switches on the dome line up with the sensors on the board. Right, so now let's get all of these lined up here. Alright, they look lined up, so I'm just going to gently push the tape down, and there we go. Our button is there. What's funny is I can actually feel a huge difference in pushing down this button to the old one. The old one barely moved at all, and this one, if you listen closely, you can actually kind of hear a click, which is great. Because on this system, both the power and the reset are on the same button. You press the button quickly to reset the game, and you hold the button down to power off the system. A lot of times what happens on these older systems is that the power button will turn it on, but it doesn't make enough contact when you hold it down to turn the power off, and instead we'll just reset the game, and oftentimes you have to unplug the system. In fact, that's where this one got to. Alright, so now the toggle button is done. Time to put the power board back in place. Alright, so these should line right back up into the holes we pulled them out from. Alright, now we've got the ribbon cable pushed back in. Gonna tack the other end here. This end's a little bit tacked. I did that off camera just because it's a little bit easier to get the ribbon cable pushed through with one end all the way through there. And so now it is time to do the rest of the joints. Back here, because these ones are actually supposed to be joined, and make sure they flow together. There we go. My goodness, this one really does not want to close up the holes. There we go. Oh, nope, one side is still hanging loose a little bit. There we go. So we'll jiggle the wire a bit. Now it's another one where these two are supposed to be connected. Take a look through our work real fast. Everything is looking okay. Just make sure these are really good and joined. Yep, that's it. Alright, let's get this board cleaned up. And then after it is cleaned up and I clean up all the soldering tools, it is time to put this sucker back in the shell. Thanks for following along in this video that was slightly longer than normal, as we replaced all the capacitors in the system. This is really the last step that we need to do before we can button the system back up and give it back to its owner. If you like this video, please be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to be notified of future videos. Have a great one.